and I wanted to do something a little more casual is not the right term, but loosey-goosey. I'm a Southerner, so maybe loosey-goosey is a Southern phrase.
I love it. All right, well, it is 12 o'clock on the hour Eastern time, so I think that we can get started. And I am Harper Christopher from McGraw-Hill. I'm joined with Stephanie DeRosa, also with McGraw-Hill, and we are thrilled to have our guest speaker today, Joe Hoyle, who is one of the co-authors of the market-leading advanced accounting textbook and the inaugural winner of the American Accounting Association's Cook Prize for undergraduate teaching. He's been teaching for 52 years as a college teacher and is here today to provide hints and on becoming a better accounting teacher. He's going to talk about motivating your students, helping them to arrive to class better prepared to learn. And Professor Hoyle will discuss techniques he's used over the years to help students go beyond basic memorization and into a true understanding of accounting and its principles and techniques. And over the past few decades, Professor Hoyle has spoken to faculty from Florida to California, from Las Vegas to Washington, D.C. on improving college teaching. So we're so thankful for him being here and for you coming to hear his advice to both new and to experienced teachers on getting the very best from their accounting students. So with that said, and you can see his email is here. You are welcome to send Christmas cards and any kind of accolades. But I'm gonna turn the stage over to Joe Hoyle, who we're excited to have here. Thanks, Joe.
I'm going to go back to the first slide for just half a second. I just want to thank McGraw-Hill for inviting me to do this. Obviously, I have an advanced accounting book with McGraw-Hill, and I'm always delighted to push the advanced accounting book. But they were kind enough to ask me to actually talk for an hour or so, 45 minutes to an hour, about teaching. And I never turn down the chance to talk to people about teaching. I just think it's so very important. And I appreciate Harper and Stephanie, my two McGraw-Hill folks, who worked on getting this done and for setting this up. So I just want to thank McGraw-Hill for that. I do want to stress too, and I put this in the title, it says tips for becoming a better accounting teacher. And I put accounting in parentheses. And the reason I did that was because this is not just for accounting teachers. Now, okay, I'm an accounting teacher and some of my examples will be about accounting, but I think motivating students and I think getting students to learn and to do better is more of a teacher thing than just an accounting teacher thing. So if you're on here and you don't teach accounting, if you teach biology or English or whatever, I still hope that most of everything I talk about will be applicable to you too, because I want the conversation not to simply be restricted to accounting teachers, but to teachers as a whole. Again, you know who I am. I do want to stress my email address. If you tomorrow or next Tuesday or whenever, if you decide, I have a question I'd really like for Joe to think about, please send me an email. It's jhoyle@richmond.edu. I will do everything I possibly can to respond to you. To introduce me, this is how I wanted to introduce myself. And that is, I've been a teacher for 52 years. I started teaching in August of 1971. So my first question of you would be, how old were you in August of 1971? And my bet is most of you were not born yet. But I walked into a class at that time to teach, never thinking I would be teaching for 52 years. At the same time, I've had the same wife for 52 years. And so I just thought this morning as I was working on this, that 52 is clearly my lucky number because I've been a teacher and had the same wife for that period of time. I am truly thrilled to be with you. I know that sometimes people have trouble finding somebody to do a webinar. As I said before we actually began, they didn't have to twist my arm to do this. I'm delighted to talk with teachers about how to be a better teacher. In 52 years, I've actually started over 100 semesters. So that's 100 semesters of walking into a brand new class. And I will tell you honestly, I have loved it. Now, I have not loved every day. There's some days that drive you crazy. I won't be that silly, but I have loved the job of working with college students. And in that time, I have thought a lot about how to evolve as a teacher. I'm a big believer in the word better, is that I'm always trying to become a better teacher. I'm not trying to become a great teacher or a wonderful teacher or an excellent teacher. I'm trying to become a better teacher. And I'm just thrilled to have this opportunity. Now that brings us to maybe a more important question. Why are you here? Nobody put a gun to your head. Nobody twisted your arm. Why are you here? And my best guess is that you're here because you're hoping to find out ways to become also a better teacher. So my first suggestion would be, don't try to do everything that I talk about today. Teaching, like so much of life, is an evolution. So my suggestion would be to jot down 2 or 3 or 4 ideas that I throw out there, and then think about them for a day or 2 or a week or 2, and then maybe pick 1 or 2 of them to apply to your class. You get better one step at a time. So I'm not out for anyone to create a revolution and just change the teacher. I want you to get a little bit better because of this presentation. And I think the way to do that is to pick a couple of things we talk about and see if you think they can be applied to your class. I want to start with something that I think is important. I am around teachers all the time, and they'll often tell me, oh, I'm just a teacher. I don't produce anything. I don't make tables. I'm just a teacher. And I want to start out with what I think is the most important thing I have to tell you today. I always say, tell the important stuff first. And this is a quote from Nelson Mandela. And it's a quote that I honestly believe in to the very bottom of my dirty little heart. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Now, we're all teachers. If we want to change the world, and for goodness sakes, I think all of us understand that the world could use some improvement, then we have to play our part. We have to provide as much better, good quality education as we possibly can. We have to make our students better, more thoughtful human beings. You and I have the chance to actually make a difference in this world. I get emails. In fact, I've got emails this week from a student that graduated in 1983, a student that graduated in 1990, and a student that graduated in 2005. All 3 of them said, we're going to be in town. We want to come by. We want to talk with you because we were in your class. That is so important to me. As I look back, at some point, you'll be looking back on your career. As I look back on my career, that idea that I've helped to improve a few students has been so important to me. So it's easy to think, oh, I'm just a teacher. This is the most important job in the world. I believe that. I'm not just saying that. I think you need to believe that too. So let's get started. Let's see if we can make that important job better. I think a good way to begin this, and this is something I started doing about 15 years ago. Start every semester, start every day with a clear vision of what you want to have at the end of the semester. I always tell people that I talk with about teaching that what the first thing you should do is picture yourself going into your class on the last day of the semester and think about it being perfect, that it goes exactly like you want it to go. What would that look like? Because if you can picture it, then you can work to make it happen. But if you don't have a picture of that last day of class, then you're just off on a random wander is all you are. You need to think about, I teach Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9, 10:30, and at 1:30. The last day of class at 9, 10:30, and 1:30 this semester, I know what I want my students doing and what they want them to look like. And I tell them, this is not just locked into my brain. I tell them all the time, by the end of the semester, this is what this class needs to look like. It will not happen on the first day. It won't happen on the 5th day. But by the end of the semester, this is what I want this to look like. I'm trying to get my students excited about that ending, that they see what they can become. Don't worry so much about today. Worry about how today leads to that end. So here's what my vision is. Whenever I start the semester, here's what I want to see on the last day of class. I walk in on the last day of the class, every single student is prepared. It's not that they're half prepared or 1/3 prepared, they're all prepared. I go in, I ask some kind of strange, bizarre question, and everyone wants to talk. Everyone wants to be engaged. Everyone is interested in being part of that conversation. If I have a perfect semester, then that last day I walk in, I say, good morning, students. Here's a question, and they're prepared and they're ready to answer that question, and they don't hold back. I don't have to, I don't have to twist arms. They're ready to talk. And I want them, in addition, to know what my goal is. Now notice, this is my vision. My vision is that they'll be prepared and they'll be ready to talk, but they'll also know what my goal is. Do you have a goal for your class? Can you write in one sentence your goal for your class? Here's the goal from my class. And this is what I tell the students all the time. I want you to understand, and I underline the word understand. I don't want you to memorize. I don't want you to chant. I don't want you to, write on a piece of paper. I want you to understand financial accounting so well that you can figure out unique problems without me. I think too much education is teacher-centered. Everything seems to come from the teacher. I want them to get where they don't need me. I want them to understand the material. So for example, in financial accounting, we're talking about buildings and equipment. At the end of the semester, if I ask them a strange, stupid question about buildings and equipment, I want them to understand the rules so well that they can figure out this bizarre, stupid question without me. Because as I tell them pretty much all the time, I can't go with them through life. At the end of the semester, they go one way and I go back and teach another class. So they always, in fact, the motto of my class, the thing they get so sick of, is what I call FIO, figure it out. I love to walk into class and give them some strange question and look at the student and go, FIO, figure it out. And the only way they can figure it out is if they truly understand what we've talked about. See, I think that that's an education worth having. I know college education gets beaten up all the time by critics. I think that's an education that's clearly worth having. Now, let's get some hints. So you know my vision and you know my goal. It's important to meet the students with wherever they are. And here's the story I always tell. If I walked into class tomorrow, I have roughly 59 students, I think. And I walked in, and that's all 3 of my classes. And if I walked in and said, I have a 2018 Subaru sitting in the parking lot, I will give you $100 if you'll go out and change the oil. Now, 30 years ago, if I had asked that question, they'd all looked at me like I was insane. Maybe one student would say, oh, my father's a mechanic, I can do that for you. The others would just have looked at me like I was nuts. If I walked into class tomorrow and said, I have a 2018 Subaru, I'll give you $100 if you'll change the oil. Every single student would open their phone to YouTube and they would type in, how do you change the oil in a 2018 Subaru? And they would all race each other out to the parking lot to change the oil in my car. This, they're called a DIY, do it yourself generation. Oh, that's a wonderful characteristic. I've tried to emulate that myself sometimes. So what I've tried to do is to think how I can meet them where they're at. So I've become much more interested in producing my own videos. Now, as soon as I say that, people go, oh, that's going to be expensive. It's going to cost money. Oh, no, you can do this for free. You can do this for free. Now, before I talk about what I've done for my classes, this is, after all, McGraw-Hill presentation. One of the things that I added to my advanced accounting textbook, now, I wouldn't have added this if I didn't believe this was going to work, is I have added 50 videos for the end of chapter material. So I have gone in and said, and the question is, what do you put on these videos? And what I have chosen to put on the videos is just hints. So let's assume, of course, advanced accounting is talking about consolidated financial statements. So let's assume that problem number 12, the end of chapter 4 or something, is a problem I like. And I think, what do the students need? Well, first off, they don't need me to work the problem for them. That's for them to do. But they need me, or they need help in getting over the complicated stuff or the difficult stuff or the problem stuff. So as part of doing the advanced accounting textbook for our 15th edition, I have made, or I'm in the process of making, 50 hint videos where I'm trying to get the students to learn how to do it themselves. If you watch this video, then you can work the problem yourself, and you can go in, and then the teacher can build on that you've learned that material in advance. So I bring that up because this is a hint that I thought, well, I've done this in my own class, and it has worked so well, then it ought to be something I can add to the textbook in that way. So let me talk to you, I'll go back to this video, about how I do this in my class. I take the things, I'll take leases, for example. Leases is just so complicated. So one of the things that I can do is I can make a short little video about leases and say, okay, if you're doing a lease, here's some hints that you could do. Now, how do I do that in my own class? Well, it's simple. I make PowerPoint slides, just like you're looking at. I go to Zoom, just like you're looking at. I hit record, just like we've done here for this, and I talk about it. I hit the annotate button and I draw a little picture so I can do this. You've probably seen some of the Khan Academy videos. This is not me being smart. This is me looking at Khan Academy videos and seeing how I can apply that to my own class. Then I got a friend of mine to set me up a YouTube channel. I have my own YouTube channel, and I simply upload or download, whichever it would go, from my video from Zoom into my YouTube channel, and then I send the URL to my students. They're impressed that I actually was able to do this at my age, and it gives them a way they can watch that video and then watch that video and then watch that video again, and then they walk into class and they're not just starting at point zero. They already know quite a bit about how to work that lease problem. And once you've done that, then it will be on YouTube and you can use it semester after semester. At my age, I'm always hesitant about doing something that I only use one time. I love doing things that I can use over and over. So I keep a list of what I've got, the videos, what the URL is, and what they cover, and then I just send them to the students. You can do that. And the students will just be so appreciative of you taking your time to help them in that way. You're meeting them where they're at. That's what we mean. That's what I mean by a do-it-yourself generation. They like YouTube videos, so you learn to use that. Now, here's my next hint. And in truth, this is one of the two most important hints I could give anybody. If you really want to have better classes, then you've got to get your students to prepare for those classes. I will just guarantee you, if you can get your students to be prepared when they walk into class, the class will automatically go better. And the reason is the students know what you're talking about. They can be engaged, they can become interested, they can add their own comments. They can talk about the topic. But if you want to ruin a class, just make sure that the students are not prepared when they walk in. Because if they're not prepared, you only have one option. And that one option is to lecture. Because they don't have anything they can say. They're not prepared. So when I first really got serious about teaching, I taught one way for 20 years, and then I decided to get really serious about teaching. One of the very first things I focused on was, how do I get my students to prepare for class? If you can do that, your teaching will automatically get improved. So one of the things I love to do is to create problems for them, but put them into kind of puzzles. I will put students on a foreign planet and say, okay, you're on the planet Kryptonite. And here is the accounting rules on Kryptonite. And you're trying to take a transaction, let's say a lease transaction, and translate it from Kryptonite into US GAAP. That's just a puzzle to them. It's like, Kryptonite? Translate to, you're trying to catch their attention. They're so much more likely, hit the wrong button, to really get interested and prepare if you put something into a puzzle. So here's a question I actually asked my students a couple of days ago. And I don't think that there's actually an official answer to this in US GAAP. If you find an official answer in US GAAP, you can send it to me. I don't think there's an official answer. I think there's an unofficial answer to this. And the question is this: company owes $100,000 that's due in a couple months. Payment might be in cash, it's a current asset, or it might be in 5 acres of land, a non-current asset. Well, that's a simple transaction. It makes sense. You're going to have to pay this debt. You could pay it in cash, or you could pay it with 5 acres of land. According to US GAAP, is this debt a current liability or a non-current liability? And we have spent, in my intermediate accounting class, probably 45 minutes just talking about whether this is a current liability or a non-current liability. Now, remember, I don't think you can actually find an official answer to this question. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out how you solve problems. See, if there's a rule, you just follow the rule. Anybody can do that. But the real work of an accountant, and probably the real work of any business person, is to do things when there's not a rule. How do you solve problems when there's not just a set answer to that problem in this case? And you can just get students who don't even think that. I had a student in my student evaluations last year who wrote, I love this class and I don't even like accounting. And I thought that was such a wonderful statement. If you really get the students interested, they will enjoy learning, even if accounting is not necessarily their thing. Who doesn't like a puzzle one way or the other? So I tend to try to write as many of my questions as puzzles as possible. Here's some other tips I've got for preparation. The chapters, I'm doing leases. The chapter is about 30 pages long. It used to be I would go into class and say, read chapter, I guess it's 15. Is go into the chapter and read chapter 15. Well, the students would read the first paragraph and they skim the second paragraph and they start flipping through the book. It's just too much material. And so they would come to class after I gave that assignment and they really wouldn't know what we were talking about. So now what I do is I say, tomorrow we're going to talk about the lessee, the person who uses the asset. And we're going to talk about operating leases. So what I want you to do is to read the following 4 pages, not the whole chapter, but the following 4 pages. But I want you to read that really darn carefully so that when you come into class, you know how to handle this. And you have basically given them enough specific guidance that helps quite a bit. And I have gone from, I just never ask them to read a chapter anymore. I always say, read these 4 pages or read these 5 pages or look at that green box or whatever. And they're much more likely to do that because they know I'm going to talk about that in class. I'm going to ask them questions about that. The second hint is, if you give a problem, give them some of the answers so they'll know. Students get frustrated very quickly when you give them a problem because they don't know if they're doing it right or wrong. So if I give them a lease problem, what I might do is I might say, okay, on January 1, year one, the Jones Company leases a truck from Ford, and here's the information. Tell me the journal entries will say for the first 2 years. And then I'll put down, and oh, by the way, if you do this question correctly, at the end of 2 years, your asset, your right of use asset, will be, and I'll give them a number like $33,445. So that when they work it, they're always saying, well, if I get the $33,445, then I'll know I'm right. Or if I get to $33,345 or I get something else, I'll know I'm wrong. Don't give them all the answers because that's their job, but give them enough of an answer so they know whether they're working in the right direction or the wrong direction. And think about what answers will be helpful in that way. A third suggestion is give them some time limits. Students are bad about saying, well, I don't know how long I should spend, so shorter is always better. I'll spend 10 minutes and pray it's enough. I almost always tell my students, this assignment should take about 75 minutes. Okay, if you're real smart, it will take 65 minutes, but about 75 minutes is right. If you're not willing to spend 75 minutes, it tells me that you really don't want an A, that you really don't want to be excellent in this case. Time limits help because that gives them some guidance. These are, at least in my classes, these are young people. They have had years and years and years of high school and middle school education. You're trying to get them to adapt to college education. So give them some guidance. I think you can learn this, but you're going to need to spend 75 minutes. Is a pretty big help. Now remember, what did I just cover? I just covered tips for getting students to prepare. And the idea being that if they're prepared when they walk into class, you'll have a wonderful class. I guarantee, I don't care how much you like teaching or hate teaching, doesn't make any difference to me. If you get the students to be able to be prepared when they walk in, you'll get to love teaching because you're talking to people who know what, have something to say. You have talking to people who you can actually teach well. So if your problem is that you're beginning to not like teaching, work on getting them to prepare better. The teaching will become more fun. But now I'm going to switch to the other side of the coin. And that is, what do you do after the class is over? I meant to put this as a slide. I think I forgot to. You don't know what you don't know. And students are horrible about that. When they walk out of class, in my case, at 9:50 no, what time do I teach? At 9:50 on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they all think they know it. They need some way to review and organize that material right then. They need to find out right then whether they have understood that material. So over the last decade, I have focused more of my teaching on what you do immediately after class, probably than any other thing. Because if you don't get to them really quickly, the information will start seeping out of their brains and they will start losing their knowledge of what you've talked about. So how do you review and organize immediately after class? This might very well be the best tip I give you. If you want to simply say, give me a very good tip, this is what I do. And I do it probably between half and 2/3 of the time. Immediately after class, I email my students what I call a 10% 20-minute question. And I've got a whole file of these now. And it's a 10% question because I try to make it 10% harder than what we do in class. I don't try to make it 100% harder or 50% harder. I just try to add a slightly different twist to it. and tell them, okay, I'm trying to stretch you. I'm trying to make you a better student. This is a little harder, not much harder, but a little harder, 10% harder. And then I tell them, and I really try to make this true. I have written this question to be done in 20 minutes. It's only 20 minutes. It will tell you whether you know the material or you don't know the material. It's only 20 minutes. You're not investing hours, and it's 10% harder. And then I give them what I call the magic. I said, okay, spend 20 minutes. Here's the answers. I just give them the answers, all of them. And I say, if you, in 20 minutes, you can get to these answers, then go your way and sin no more, because you know the material well enough. Go work on next week's class. If you got the answers, I don't want to see you. Don't come by and bother me. You know the material. But if you can't get these answers in 20 minutes, then come by and tell me, and I won't tell them to you. I won't give you the answer. I won't help you. I will give you a push. I will tell you what to look at. I will tell you what you might be missing. You're probably missing one or two little things that you thought you knew, but you didn't know. I will help you by giving you that push. And then I strongly suggest do this within 24 hours, because you know what the students are going to do if you don't push them. They're going to save these things to the night before the test, and they're going to use them as cram sheets. And it's going to be at midnight the night before the test, and they'll realize they don't know how to do them. And I don't take emails after midnight. They're just going to be stuck. So I said, listen, it's only 20 minutes. It's only 20 minutes. Work it within the next 24 hours. If you can get it, super. You're on the road to an A. If you don't get it, then come in and see me immediately, because we need to fix that right now. You know, as I sit here in Richmond, Virginia, I'm staring out in the woods. We have a woods behind the back of my house. I don't know if there's anything I could possibly tell you that has worked better for me than that screen right there. The students get used to them. They like those problems. I try to make as many of them as puzzles as I possibly can. And then they can immediately come in and they can learn what they don't know. That's just an important screen. Nothing succeeds like success. You want to make students better? How you test them is how students will learn. When I first started teaching, I'd spend as little time on testing as I possibly could, because I had other things I had to do. Nowadays, I probably spend more time on tests than anything else, because that will affect how your students learn. If you test memorization, I'm telling you, if you test memorization, the word gets out to the students and all they're going to try to do is to memorize. If you test understanding, the word will get out to your students and they will work on understanding. The grapevine for students is excellent. How you test is how the students will learn. And I understand, especially if you've taught more than 5 or 10 years, that you don't like spending that time on tests. I don't either. Oh, I fussed to my wife about this. Oh, I have to write a test. I have to write a test tonight or tomorrow night because I've got a test on Friday. Spend as much time as you possibly can in this case. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is to tell them my goal in testing. And this is literally, the screen you're looking at is what I told my students yesterday morning about Friday's test. I looked at them in the eye and said, I want you to understand. Secondly, I want you to be able to use this stuff. This is not any good to you if you can't make use of it. And then going back to my all-time favorite theory, I want you to be able to figure it out so that you know what's coming in that case. So right away, notice the word memorization is not there. The word make a list is not right there. Understand, use, figure it out. It's a theme that's in my class from day one that I'm trying to get across to them. Now, how do I work on that? Well, the first thing I do is, and I started this about 15 years ago, and this I thought scared me, but I've loved it. I tell my students, and this is every single test year round, that they can bring in 2 pages of notes. They have to be in their handwriting, 2 pages of notes in their handwriting. And immediately they all go, oh my gosh, why would you let us have 2 pages of notes? We don't have to learn anything. What is the reason for giving them 2 pages of notes? First off, it forces them to think about what's important because they only have 2 pages. So what am I going to ask these questions about? What am I going to push them toward? So I always say you think a lot about what you want on those 2 pages. I can't tell you how often I've had students come to me and say, listen, I didn't have time to use the notes, but making the notes was a big help to me because I had to organize my thinking and I had to figure out, there's those words again, what you were going to test us on. So I'm not a big believer in open book tests because that's just, they just bring a book in, they just open the book up. I don't see that provides much advantage, but I think a finite, in my case, 2 pages, number of notes is really helpful for making them think. Secondly, it sends a message. As soon as you tell them that they can have notes, you're also telling them that you are not going to ask memorization questions because the first thing they can write on those notes is memorization. So you're basically throwing down a challenge. I'm going to give you the notes, but what that means is I am not going to be testing your memory. I'm going to be testing your understanding because I know that you can write down anything on those papers that you would have to memorize. And that I think is a good, because you're trying to convince the students that you're helping them, that you're making them better. And I think that indication that you're teaching understanding will sell them on that you're trying to make them better people. So also, what I found was, and this I really like, to tell you the truth, what I found was that having these notes meant that I had to start asking better questions. It used to be that I could always get them. Don't you like that when a teacher says, I could always get them? By asking them some strange memory question. You know, what's the 3rd word in FASB 14 or something like that? I could always get them. I could always pull the grades down that way. But if you're going to start asking questions when they have notes, you're going to have to come up with better questions. So if you talk to me about my own teaching, I would say in the last 10 to 20 years, primarily because I spent a lot of time thinking about it, I have learned to write much better test questions. And I think that's good. Students appreciate that when they get real good test questions. Now, one of the things I do sometimes is that I simply give them the questions in advance. I could do that on the lease questions. I could simply give them all the questions in advance. Say, okay, we're going to have 6 questions on leases. Here are the 6 questions. And then I could change all the variables. So when they get the questions in advance, the learning really gets serious then because they have to look at those questions. I'm sitting here thinking, you get distracted sometimes when you give a presentation. I'm thinking, should I really give the questions? I'm giving the lease exam on Monday. Should I give them the lease questions in advance? And now that I think about it, I might do that. I might just decide to do that. So you give them the questions. For example, you know, the truck has a life of 10 years. The lease is for 8 years. The truck has a residual value of $48,000. There's an implicit interest rate of 9%. The truck costs $200,000, whatever. And you give it to them and say, I'm going to change some of those variables. I'm going to change the implicit interest rate, or I'm going to change the life of the truck, or I'm going to change the life of the lease, or whatever. And so all of a sudden then they think more deeply about how you can change those questions. What you're doing then is you're teaching the students through the test by giving them the questions in advance. I don't do that often. I may do it again because it really is a nifty idea. Here's kind of a variation to that. I used to really feel bad. I'd come in, I'd give a hard test to my students, and they couldn't get through the information quickly enough to answer the questions. They couldn't process it quickly enough. I mean, some of these lease questions, some of these consolidation questions, some of these the buildings and equipment questions are really complicated, and they would struggle just to get the information into their head before they could even work the question. I used to call that speed testing, that they were having to see how fast they could work through that question to come up with an answer. So what I do almost every time now is I give them some preliminary information in advance. I give them some of the stuff they're going to need to process in advance. And I have been doing that for the last, 8 or 9 years. And I will give them not the questions necessarily, but just the basic information. So for example, this is an example from consolidations. Give them the parent balances, but not the subsidiary balances until the test. So a week ahead, you give them the parent balances. Here's the parent's sales, here's the parent's cost of goods sold, here's the investment account, here's the investment income account, here's retained earnings, and so on. So they can process that much. And then you layer on top of that the subsidiary information when they show up. But they're already ready for that question and they've already done some of the processing. Or in the second example, you give them the information for both companies. Here's the parent, here's the subsidiary, but you don't tell them until the test what percentage the parent owns. So for example, you might say, okay, here's the information. The parent bought 70% of the sub a year ago, or the parent bought 80% of the sub 2 years ago. But they've already gone through the information. They don't have to sit there and kind of try to get this into their head so quickly. Or when I don't have time to hear, if you're doing a consolidation where they have intra-entity transfers, parent sells stuff to the sub, don't tell them until the test, whether it's upstream or downstream. So you can give them some of the information so they can be working on it and thinking about it, but the real questions come in later. Oh, testing is so important. I don't know how much time you spend on testing, but really would urge you to think about that as much as possible. I teach a lot of first-year students. I teach a lot of juniors. By the time I teach the juniors, they have learned quite a bit about how to prepare. I mean, there's only 2 years difference, but there's 10 years difference in maturity. With my first-year students, and you may be teaching some first-year students, I have to remind myself that they were in high school at this time last year. And that high school may have been wonderful, but the high school may also have been not so good. So I always try to give them some guidance. So again, I'm giving an intro test on Friday. So what I told them last week was, you need to set a time guideline for how much time you want to spend. I would suggest that you spend 10 to 15 hours, something like that. I said, if you study 10 to 15 hours, then you should be able to make an A. I mean, you should know all the material. So what you should do then is study 2 or 3 hours per day until the test. And then, wrap it up the night before and go to a movie or something. It's amazing how many students just did not comprehend that. They were used to studying 75 minutes for a test the night before. They were used to that cramming mentality. And I wanted to get them away from cramming. So I just told them, I said, listen, from my experience, if you want to really do well in this class, then probably let's say 10, 12 hours would be enough. Spread it out over 5 or 6, 7 days, and don't spend too much time the night before. And they just looked at me, some of them, like I was telling them the cure for cancer, because they had never heard that. They had been used to, I've got a test tomorrow, I'm going to start studying at 10 o'clock tonight, and I'll stay up all night. Well, that's not a good way to study. That's silly. But they needed that guidance. Always remember, if you're teaching, like I am, 19 and 20-year-olds, they can be fairly young. A question I like. How much of the talking do you want to do in class? See, I said earlier that most education is too teacher-based. So how much of the talking do you want to do, and who should do the rest? Now you have to decide this for yourself. I always tell people, and I've told people this for 30 years, I only want to do half of the talking. Is I really want to limit my talking to only 50% of the talking. Now, who do I want to do the rest? And the answer to that question is, I want every single student in my class to do the rest of the talking. I don't want the 10% who seem to have their hands up in the air all the time to do the rest of the talking. I want everybody to do the talking. I'm a teaching fellow at the Robbins School of Business. And as that, I read student evaluations as a help to the faculty. And it's amazing how many times students will fuss that the teacher only has 10% of the students do all the talking. Students want to be engaged if you get them to do that. So do you want to do 90% of the talking? Do you want to do 80% of the talking? How much do you want to do? I have a goal, that's 50%. I shoot for that every single day, and I want all the students to do the rest of the talking. So I know what the next question is going to be. How do you get the students to do the talking? Well, I can give you two good ways to do that. I cold call on people. I walk in, start the class, I start calling on people. Now, I understand that you and your students may find that uncomfortable. Here's my experience with cold calling. The first week, the students, wiggle around a little bit in their chair. They look a little embarrassed if you call on them. The second week, they get quite a bit better. And by the third week, this is normal. Students are young. They adapt very well. If you go in the first week and you say, we're just going to call on people, be ready. Here you go. And I give them questions in advance and I call on them. The first week, yeah, it can be a little bit uncomfortable. Second week, maybe. By the third week, they've adapted. They are used to adapting to teachers. I'm not telling you that you should cold call. A lot of people just won't do that, but you should consider it. The problem is you can't go into cold calling half the way. Cold calling is something you've got to either do or not do. So my students know when they walk in, they'll be called on. They will not know the question. But if they give me a bad answer, I just move on. I don't make them feel bad. I don't try to make them feel guilty. I don't try to make them feel dumb. I just want to hear what they have to say. So if I walk in tomorrow and ask the student, what is depreciation? Well, they've got an assignment. They should know that. If I ask, what's the capitalized cost of a piece of equipment? They should know that. I think they'll know that. But that's one way. Now, let me give you a second possibility. Let's assume you don't like cold calling as such. Then when you walk in, give the students a 5-minute warm-up exercise. Just say, okay, let's assume that you buy a piece of equipment for $100,000. You has a life of 10 years, has a residual value of $2,000 and using straight line depreciation. What's the book value after 3 years? Something like that. Something that they could work in 5 minutes. Do it real quickly, give it to them, have them work it, and then ask them about that. Because you're not exactly cold calling. You say, what did you do first? What did you do next? How did you manage to adapt to this? And the reason that's not pure cold calling is they have just worked that problem. And so therefore they have something that they can talk about in that case. I once had an English teacher that I knew who was just great at this. She wanted conversation. So she would give an assignment at the beginning of every class for 5 minutes. And then she would ask the students, and it was just marvelous. It worked so very well because the students then were into it. They had tried to work the problem. They had seen the issues. They were into it at that time. Participation grade, I don't give participation grades. We could have that conversation if you want. And the reason I don't give participation grades is I think they're too hard to determine. And I think they confuse the students. I've never seen anybody that did participation grades where I thought that really was beneficial. You may be using it if you are, and if it's working for you, then that's great. I don't use participation. What I tell the students, in fact, it's in my course syllabus. I expect you to participate every single day as a part of this course. I don't think you should be rewarded for doing what's a normal thing in education. I think participation is normal. I don't think you should be rewarded for doing the normal stuff. Good teaching and a good marriage both require great communications. Firm believer in that, firm believer. And this is what I like this, Harper got this picture for me. Students cannot read your mind. I often talk to my students and I'll say, I taught this now for 52 years. Why haven't you learned it by now? And they all look at me like I'm nuts, because of course for them, it's new stuff. So therefore, you need to communicate with them. They cannot read your mind. They don't know what you want or need. Figure out some good way to communicate. I have friends who get to class a little early and they'll spend the first 5 minutes of class communicating to students, talking to the students. Here's what I need from you. Here's what the next assignment is. Here's what you need to be doing. They get that communication out. I don't do that. I send emails and I tell my students in big bold letters that I am an email person. And so what I tell them is, I will send you, this is going to shock you probably, I will send you probably 1 or 2 emails every single day throughout the semester. And I do. I really send them. There's always something. I communicate with my wife every day. I communicate with my students every day. It's the same thing to me. I tell them what I want. I tell them what I need. I tell them what I found is interesting. I talk with them. Now, I always tell them that anything I send by email is subject to be testing. That will always wake them up. If you say, oh, I'll send you some emails. Anything I send you by email is subject to testing, and they will pay attention. Find a way to communicate that works for you. Don't expect them to be able to read your mind. That probably is not going to work, to tell you the truth. If you get to be a good communicator, that will really help your teaching in that case. And we're almost finished. I've got about 6 minutes. I got about 6 minutes more to say. I hate to say this one because this is not going to make you happy. If you're not happy with your teaching, one way to do better is to spend more time. The days that I'm not happy, I almost always know that if I had spent more time, I would have gone better. People show up for a program like this expecting, magic pills where they can take this magic pill and it all work better. Or there's some super hidden hint that if I just give you this super hidden hint, it will all go better. Here is the magic pill. To be a better student, you probably need to spend more time. To be a better teacher, you probably need to spend more time. I am sorry. I tell my students that. I would love to be able to teach them better and they spend less time. But it doesn't work like that. That's just silly. It's not common sense. I need to get my students to spend more time. Likewise, on the days it doesn't go well, the one thing I know is if I had spent more time thinking about it, it probably would have gone better in this case. Spend more time is not a bad hint at all. Now, I want to close down, and then I'll turn it back over to Harper and to Stephanie with one of my all-time favorite quotes. And I could give you a long story about this, but it's from the book Hoyle by Cheryl Stray. And she's getting ready to do something that it looks absolutely impossible if you've read it's a book and it's a movie. And she has this quote, and I have thought about this quote for years now. Fear, to a great extent, is born of a story we tell ourselves. Now, what I'd like for you to do is drop the word fear. I'm not here to scare you, and change it to success or change it to good teaching. Good teaching, to a great extent, is born of a story we tell ourselves. So one of the things here in closing that I would like for you to think about is, what stories are you telling yourself about your students and your teaching? So, for example, as Harper said at the beginning, I go out and go around the country and give presentations at universities or groups or whatever about teaching, and people will come up to me afterwards And they'll always start telling me stories. And the story sounds something like this. Today, students don't want to learn. Today, students are just lazy. Today, students are snowflakes. I'm not exactly sure what that even means, but I hear that. Those are just common stories I hear. Let's be honest with ourselves. You don't have to, this is not confession. You don't have to confess to me, but confess to yourself. When you talk about your students, is this the way you talk about your students? They don't want to learn. They don't want to work. They are lazy. They're not like they used to be. Oh, I love that story. Students, 18-year-old people are not like they used to be. That's just wrong. Students are just 18-year-olds, are just 18-year-olds. Be careful about the stories you tell yourself. So think about stories that you could give that would, give them a good reason. And most students will work and learn. At least my experience is that if I give them a good reason. Now, let me back up a half a second. I probably should have said this when I began. None of this works perfectly. If you've got 100 students and you're Socrates himself, and you get 99 of those students to just think as hard as they possibly could, there's always going to be at least one student who just isn't going to do it. There is just no way that anything I or you or anybody else can do that will make this work 100% of the time. But for most students, if you give them a good reason, they will do the work and learn, but you have to give them a good reason. As a student once told me, I've got a whole lot of things to do. If what you're telling me is not important, I'll find something else to do. And you really do need to say that. Secondly, you need to engage them and they will grow interested. Don't ever expect a student to walk into an accounting class or any other class and go, oh my gosh, this is what I've dreamed of, attending an accounting class. No, you've got to engage them. They will walk in thinking that this is going to be boring, and you've got to engage them. Tell them what you want and why, and most students will do it. Those are good stories. They give you hope. They give you optimism, and I think they're true. I don't think I'd have kept this job for 52 years if I didn't believe that I could get the students to actually do what I hope that they'll be able to do. And then I'm going to leave you with two slides, and then Harper, you've got about 30 seconds. This is something I saw in Fortune magazine in 2006. In virtually every field of endeavor, most people learn quickly at first. So if you are looking at teaching, when you're thinking about teaching, most people learn how to teach pretty quickly. The more they learn quickly at first, and then more slowly, and then stop developing completely. So in other words, they plateau. Is that most people, when you're looking at teaching, they learn it, they get good, and then they slow down. But then in blue, I've got here, this is from Fortune magazine, yet a few do improve for years and even decades and go on to greatness. If I have a wish for you, if I have a single wish for you, it's that last sentence, that you will go on improving for years and even decades and go on to greatness. And then I would go back, if I could, to the Nelson Mandela quote, the world needs better education. The world needs all of us to do a better job. The final slide, you have questions, concerns, all kinds of stuff, please feel free to contact me. I'm Joe Hoyle. My email is jhoyle@richmond.edu. I have a teaching blog. I have 318 essays on teaching. Can you imagine one poor guy having 318 essays about one thing? My wife says I'm a little bit obsessed. And that teaching blog has had, as of a week ago, 671,762 page views. I always put that up to say, yeah, people do actually read this. People do actually read this and think about it. And I find that extremely interesting and helpful. If there's any way I can help you, if there's anything I can do to make your teaching better, don't hesitate to contact me. I'd love to talk with you about your teaching. I'm glad to do that. It's a genuine pleasure. I wouldn't make that offer if it wasn't serious. Harper, my clock says it's exactly 1 o'clock. I bet you didn't think I could hit it on the button at 1 o'clock.
You did a great job, Joe. Thank you so much. And there was one question that leads back to, I think it was your best favorite tip, which was 20 minutes, there's 10%, 20 minutes. The
Yep.
question was, do you grade that? Do you make that
No,
grading?
absolutely not. And see, and now I can give you another hour about this. You see, you started me now, Harper, and I can talk another hour. And see, my feeling is that if you convince the students that this is beneficial to them, and you convince the students that this is reasonable, it's not an hour or 2 hours, it's just 20 minutes, it's reasonable, it comes from class, then they're adults. Now they're young adults. It's their responsibility. I always tell the students, and this will be interesting to you. I always tell students, I get paid whether you learn or not. Just keep that in mind. If you learn, I get paid. If you don't learn, I get paid. It's your education. I'm glad to help you, to push you, to encourage you, to motivate you. But at the end of the day, you're an adult. Time to, come into the world and do the right thing. So do I grade it? No, heck no. Don't do it. Would it be a good idea? Well, maybe. But that's not really what I'm selling. I'm selling, you're an adult, you're responsible, this is important.
All right, there were a couple of other questions. How do you balance conceptual questions and problems in a test? And do you give grades for attendance? And I think you said participation, you did not grade.
Don't grade participation. Do I grade attendance? Here's what I do about attendance. I'm lucky, I have fairly small classes. If a student doesn't show up a time or two, I will email them and tell them I need to talk with them. And then they will have a one-on-one conversation with me about why they're not attending. If they keep not attending, I'll call the dean of students and say, I've got a student here who's somebody's paying $70,000 for this education, and he or she is not showing up. But if they eventually just say, listen, I am not going to come to your class for whatever reason, fine. One less problem I've got in this case. But I do try to keep at them very quickly. You'd be surprised if a student misses, they think you don't notice. So if you send them an email and say, John Doe, you missed class today, I hope you're okay, they're shocked that you took the time to even notice and to come in. So I don't take attendance, but I do notice, and I do pay attention, and I do follow up. I had a student this semester that I actually wrote and said, I think it's time for you to drop this class because you have missed a whole bunch of classes. So, bring your drop slip by and I'll sign it and you can get out because you're missing classes. He hasn't missed since. He hasn't missed the class since that time. Once I told him to drop the class, he's learned a lot of material. He's done a whole lot better, but he would have kept missing had I not done that. Conceptual versus, you'd have to see my test. If somebody wants to see one of my tests, have them email me and I'll send them a test, and they can. It's almost impossible to describe testing like that. But I don't mind sharing my tests. If somebody wants to see one of my tests and how I do it, I'll be glad to share them.
Sounds good. We have, I have the information that was in the Q&A, so I'll be able to share that with you, and perhaps you can have that conversation afterwards. But other than that, all of the chat messages are basically thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And this has been a fantastic webinar. So well done, Joe. Appreciate it. And
happy to do it. Really happy. Let's do it tomorrow. Let's do it again tomorrow. I'm ready to do it. I'm pumped up now. I'll come up with another bunch of hints, a whole completely different set of hints. We'll do it again tomorrow. Okay.
Excellent. Well, and one thing to know, we have an accounting ledger blog that is available on our McGraw-Hill website, and every new episode that comes out in our blog, we do have one of Joe's tips. So feel free to chime in, and you'll be receiving those. So and someone just said you're a rock star teacher, so there you go.
Me and Mick Jagger, yes, I said, yeah, me and Mick, just two of a kind, rock stars, yes.
All right. Well, thanks so much and have a great day. And yes, we will be recording the webinar and we'll be sending that out afterwards. So thank you all for attending, and we thank you, Joe, for a great presentation.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Have a great day.
I'm going to head. I got to go to office hours now and actually teach. It's you talk about viruses, I go do it.
Doing what you do best. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.